Sourdough since 1985, but I've done bread since 1966.
And what made you get started with the sourdough?
Interest why which bread would be better, and luckily because I started in 66, 1971 was the first sourdough research done in San Francisco bread by Sugihara, Klein, and Dr. Miller, and that got me interested. And my wife, being a biochemist, she tried to help me out a little bit. I learned life. What makes life? Ingredients when we eat don't make food. There's macronutrition, there's micronutrition. Micro comes from microorganisms producing it for you, where you don't have calories involved. Macro is disease causing. When you have carbs in your blood, when you have protein in your blood, when you have fat in your blood, you start inflammation, chronic inflammation, eventually diseases. You need microbes to give you nutrition. You need micronutrition, which comes from microorganisms. All three microorganisms, major ones, are important. Lactobacillus of many varieties, wild yeast, and even molds. Algae are also important. Each one giving you different nutrition, depending what we feed them at what intervals and what temperatures. When we put food in our mouth, we assume we're going to accept it and be able to handle it. Don't put things in your mouth unless you know what you're doing. You could be eating poison. What is poison? Gluten is also poison, but it's a weaker form. Learning about gluten, there are many varieties of gluten. It's not only wheat. Uh, Gluten, four varieties, and one variety needs water, very little salt. Another variety needs a lot of salt and water. Another variety needs acids. And the main problem we have is the one that needs alcohol. We are not alcohol producers. That's why in the sourdough we have this alcohol and acid formation and enzymes that break up the protein molecule that's complex. It's like Scrabble. You put letters together, you make a word. Same thing with amino acids. Amino acids together, your DNA has to make the protein. You should not be told to eat protein. You need amino acids to be able to make protein through your DNA. We should learn that how to start sourdough. We can start out of fermenting fruit juice and adding gluten to it or white flour. Eventually, you have a sourdough made. It's so simple. In 3-4 days, you can have sourdough made, but they would not be good quality ones. And every grain has microorganisms in them. Barley has yeast, baker's yeast, which is not GMO modified. When you grind barley, you add hot water. 2-3 days later, you have non-GMO baker's yeast. And that was the original yeast if anybody did anything. Almost anybody's bread today is made with GMO yeast, and it's not good starting with GMO. And then uh, yeast does not break up the gluten. Now, every plant source has endophytes. Endophytes are bacteria, yeast, and mold. Depends which plant you go to extract those in liquid form so they multiply. So no matter how much you play with barley, it's not a good endophyte to start a sourdough. Rye has very many acid-producing homofermented lactobacillus, which gives out more sour taste. That's how most people start with rye to start a sourdough mother. The bread was lavash, it was flat. Biblically, they tell you you break bread. Alaskan prospectors or Roman soldiers had nothing but sourdough bread. How come they survived, never got diseases? We don't know of major diseases they had. So vitamin C came from the bread, even though the bread was baked. If they were sick and they had to take ascorbic acid, which is what you see in packages as vitamin C, they would not have healed. Those are synthetic forms or non-DNA formed foods that your body doesn't recognize. And in France, about a year ago, they found out when we eat too much vitamin C every day, eventually it gives us cancer. So synthetic foods are not food. After that, Romans and Greeks, they introduced different kind of wheat. Today we have about 2,000 varieties of wheat. At that time, they were able to come up with one where they would raise the loaf and you could slice bread today. It wasn't sliced bread before. Whole grain, broken grain, coarse ground grain has gluten that cannot be removed. White flour is ground 28 times, much finer. When water and sourdough is added, they can deplete the gluten. And because we age up to a month before we bake, another 18, 20 hours or so fermentation, we do far better job, and we don't add yeast. Even in San Francisco, the first bakery, they brought their sourdough culture from Italy. They were French people. When they went to San Francisco, their methods did not work. They did not know how to start a sourdough from scratch. They knew a system that they brought from Italy, hoping that it would function in San Francisco. It didn't. Luckily, next door there was a beer brewery. So in French, they call baguette and batar. Baguette is the one that's skinny. Batar is the blend of sourdough culture and baker's yeast. The brewer's yeast helped them raise the loaf, and the sourness from the sourdough culture gave perfect combination for a nice feel of bread. But people that have the allergies today, especially when they take antibiotics, very strong antibiotics, it affects their villi in your intestine. All of a sudden, I didn't have this issue, I cannot eat bread. So they cannot eat those other kinds of bread, even though they're labeled sourdough. They should not be labeled as sourdough, they should be labeled as bastard, which is batar.